Hello everybody, it's Grandmama. Time for another story from a Hometown Scrapbook by Ben Weatherwax. Disaster at the Chehalis Bridge. Hello there. There has been much writing and spoken about the new bridge that now spans the Wishkah River at Heron Street. The history of the old bridge has been retold, and the story of the town that grew around the river banks near the bridge has made for some good listening. And now the bridge has joined its two predecessors, and it's piling up the traffic, the county, and has already its first mark made in history with its gala opening on Saturday. No doubt it will add to its historic luster with some chapters of importance, but certainly it will have a story of its own when it has been the connecting link between East Aberdeen and the business district at Heron Street for as long as either of the previous bridges. But it is not the new Wishkah River Bridge, nor the fact any Wishkah River Bridge, that we're going to talk about tonight. It's the bridge that spanned the Chehalis in 1921 and still reaches across the muddy stream to this day. A narrow, precarious bridge that has outlasted its usefulness and should have been replaced long ago with a new span, and is, in fact, to be replaced by a new bridge before long, as the state of Washington is now preparing plans for the structure. Yes, our story tonight has to do with the old A.J. West Bridge, so called because it was first erected by that pioneer lumberman who did so much to bridge the Grays Harbor streams. It is not a happy story, but it is one that Grays Harbor has never forgotten, and one that will no doubt ring familiar to many, though you may have forgotten the details surrounding the incident. So when Dick Crombie has said a few words from our sponsor, we'll open our scrapbook to the story of December 9th, 1921. An unlucky Friday for the four men in an automobile. Dick, a word from our sponsor? Johnny Nylander was a logger. He worked for the Preston Logging Company at their camp on the Nushka, but his residence was at 415 East Market Street in Aberdeen, where he boarded at the residence of Olga Alquist. He had lived there for some time, long enough to gain an appreciation for the fine cooking and for the charm of this personality of this lovely lady, and his interest was reciprocated. Their friends knew that at Christmas time that year, Olga and Johnny would be married. Then they would go for a short honeymoon trip, probably to Seattle, in Johnny's Studebaker. This was the car that Johnny drove back and forth to camp. It was only a few months old, and he took good care of the car, even though it took on a weekly coat of much of the dirt sloshing through the muddy roads of the Nushka to the Preston camp. He washed it every Sunday and polished it about once a week. John was a good businessman. He didn't drive the car out of camp empty, not when there was plenty of passengers who wanted a lift and were willing to pay for the gasoline to produce a slight profit with their fare. So John always took 4, and sometimes 5 or 6 with him when he made the trip in the morning. Alex and Sam Ranta usually rode with him. Nestor Hill and Pete Mackey had regular tickets, and there were others. He would pick them up at the corner of Heron and F Street and drive across the old Heron Street Bridge, then cross across the West Bridge and head out for Nushka. They left early. He advised his pickups to be at the corner of Heron and H, not late. Then, 5:30 each morning, they gave each of them a good hour to get to camp and set to work. The crews went out to work at 7. Well, the first full work week of December was just about over. It was Friday morning. Saturday would finish the week, and John and Olga had made plans for Saturday night. John was thinking about them when he started his Studebaker and backed out of the garage that Friday morning. It was a misty morning. Darkness with the December dampness. He hurried to make up for a few minutes he was behind his informal schedule, and when he came to stop at the corner of Heron and F, there were 3 men waiting for a ride. Nestor Hill, Pete Mackey were there as usual, and Fred Arvell was standing by for a lift. He had never ridden with Nylander before. He had only recently gone to work at the camp. Fred had quite a family, and he had come into town to see them in the middle of the week, riding in a place of Alex and Sam Ranta, who decided to stay out at the camp the night before and had not made their way as they usually do. Beside his wife, Fred had said goodbye to his 3 daughters, Irene, Bertha, and Gertrude, when he left their house on Randall Street and hiked down to the Heron Street corner that morning. It didn't take long for the 3 men to scramble in, and under the dim lights of the Heron Street arches, the little Studebaker rumbled over the plank deck of the Heron Street Bridge and hurried off east on Heron. John O'Hare was the bridge tender at the West Bridge. He had been dozing in his chair when a tugboat tooted the bridge. He noted that it was just 5:30 by his big watch and thought that the whistle sounded like a tugboat union. He sounded the warning gong and set the traffic gates before he started, and the big swing span moving. Right behind the swing span was a little tug, cuffing and clanging and riding lights, making bright spots through the morning haze. It was the Union. John O'Hare seldom missed a guess of a whistle. He knew them all. But at times the echo or the direction of the wind would make one sound like another, and Johnny O'Hare would fire disgustingly at the cuspidor in the corner to think that he had guessed wrong. But this morning he was right. It was the tug Union, and it slipped through the open bridge and darted up the river towards Montesano. Then John set the controls to close the span. Slowly it began to swing back into place. Now it was early. There was not a car on the bridge when John O'Hare opened the bridge, but as he looked down from his control house on the big span, he could see a car coming up the north approach. It was traveling pretty fast, and as John noted later, there seemed to be just one person in it, the driver. John noted also that the warning gong was clanging with its monotonous and dull ringing, and it turned away from the approach and looked south. A car stood on the north shore waiting for the bridge to close. Then he looked to the north gate again, just as the oncoming car splintered the wood railings and hurtled into the river over the bridge. The span was fully 20 feet from being closed, and into the gap between the small automobile jumped like a living thing. It seemed to John that it floated down through the air before it hit the water, right side up. For a brief moment it floated on the surface, turning the current, but without a sign of life from its battered temperament. Then it settled quickly into the muddy waters of the Chehalis River. John stopped the bridge in its swing, but he couldn't see that was useless. So he finished the swing and raised the south gates and what was left of the north traffic guards, and hurled down from his bridge and the tender's house. He stopped the cars crossing the span and shouted the story of what he had seen, and a few minutes later Aberdeen police were getting tales of the disaster from wild-eyed motorists. Within a matter of minutes the crew was at the dock to aid the possible rescue, but there were none to rescue. No one came from the surface. The brown waters of the Chehalis continued to swirl over the spot where the little car had disappeared. Not even the license number of the car had been taken. Who was it? How many had been in the doomed car? Remained a mystery throughout the day. It was several hours after daylight when Tracy Vanus was called to the dock. Tracy was an experienced diver, and he brought his equipment, pumps, helmets, and suits. Before noon, he was down in the murky darkness of the river bottom groping for the car. He located the machine before 2 o'clock that day, and with more than 1,000 Grace Harborites looking on from the bridge approach and the docks of the Wilson Mill, he gathered little machines was brought to the surface. It was empty. No one was in the car. However, the police department was busy. As soon as the license number had been brought up by Venus, police reported that the car had been registered to the property of John Nylander. Olga Alquist supplied what she could. She knew that he had usually taken passengers, the names of who regularly made the trip, but it was not until a check had been made of the absent employees at the Preston Logging Company that the story could be pieced together. And it was 2 days before the exact information of the occupants of the car had been registered on the local police records. And it was more than a week before the facts had been accumulated and the complete story written of what, up to this time, was Grays Harbor's worst motor tragedy and its first serious accident in harbor gates of one of its many bridges. But first, a few words from Dick Crombie and our sponsor. Yes, that was the story of Friday, December 9th, 1921. One of the stories of tragedy, sudden and very real, out of Grays Harbor's past. It's part of the history of the West Bridge, which is as rich in lore as any span of the harbor area, with yarns that stem from its building by A.J. West as a toll span, its disastrous fall into the river in the late 1915s, and its rebuilding to keep it fit for traffic and to tie South Aberdeen into the city. The bridge was once made the center of a campaign to unite Aberdeen and Cosmopolis, and it was a plank in the campaign platform of Aberdeen's candidates for mayor back in the teens. It's another bridge with quite another history, and we'll make some more stories about the old bridge in other pages of our Hometown Scrapbook. Probably the story of the events of Friday, December 9, 1921 are amongst the most commonly remembered in the history of the old bridge, and the story we find tonight, sadly, in our Hometown Scrapbook. Thanks for listening.